Hello, everyone. So, here again for our second book club. Thank you all for coming along. It's lovely to see a lot of faces, not faces, a lot of names on that list that we saw last time. So, thank you for coming back. That's wonderful of you. Michael's here. How are you going,
Hello.
Michael?
I'm well, thanks.
I'll just do a quick acknowledgement of country, please. Yarra Valley Writers Festival respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners, the Wurundjeri people, as the custodians of this land. We pay respect to all Aboriginal community elders, past and present, who have resided in the area and have been an integral part of the history of this region. Thank you. Now, one thing we just wanted to remind everyone at the very beginning is that we really want you to ask questions and to be part of the conversation. So if everyone can click on the chat function, which sits at the bottom of the screen, and have a look at how that works, and just make sure that where it says to, that you click on the little arrow that says all panelists and attendees. You have a few options there, but just if it's all panelists and attendees, it means everybody is in the conversation and can see the comments you're making or the questions you're asking. You got that sorted, Michael, as well?
I've got that sorted, and reminding people that Chris, the author of Mammoth, the book we're talking to tonight, will be joining us quite soon, but we'll have a chat amongst ourselves before that. Chris might well be listening now, who knows? But we really do want your input and your comments and questions. Please don't be shy, because I'd love to express your ideas about the book to everybody and really get the conversation going. So as Brooke says, and we'll remind you occasionally throughout the hour how to actually get on to making those comments and observations and questions. And please list questions that you want to ask Chris when he comes on. It might not be a time for us to glance at all the questions when he comes on, so please get them up front now so we can actually see them. Thank you. Okay.
And we also can allow people to talk. So if you would actually rather ask a question verbally, we certainly can allow that.
Don't be shy. Please don't be shy. You're among friends here.
Excellent.
How do they do that?
So, sorry?
How do they do that? Yeah, sorry, interrupting you.
If you just request that, I'll see it here on the list that you would like to talk, and I can just press a button and it says allow to talk. So you can either ask me via chat, or you can just, if you highlight your own name in the attendee list, you can put your hand up that way. Okay, terrific. All right. So Mammoth, what a book. So how did you find it, Michael? What was your initial thoughts on it?
Okay, well, having been a lifelong student and also a writer of history, although far more modern history than this book deals with primarily, I can honestly say I've never quite read a book like this. And I'm going to ask Chris, how the hell did you pitch this one to University of Queensland Press? I can imagine that what the conversation is, look, I've got this idea for a book, and it's a dialogue between a whole bunch of fossilized animals in a museum but waiting to be sold. And the primary speaker is a kind of slightly pompous but very erudite mammoth. And I would have gone, what? But here it is. It's it's very rare where I think you come across a book in style that's completely original. And I think this really is very original. It's really interesting, the new way history is being digested and historical stories are being digested. And I think Chris does it so beautifully, because the narrator is so full of kind of dignity, the mammoth, and tragedy, and he's 13,000 years old. So there's this wonderful, and all the meanderings and all the kind of wandering off into the weeds that the story takes us to, everywhere from, the ancient world, Nazi Germany, Irish rebellions, conflicts between the French and the English in America and also in Ireland. The book just takes you absolutely everywhere, and he gets away with it through this wonderful kind of present day dialogue of these 3 or 4 different characters. My first impression was that it's a really original book. That was my first impression. And yes, I'm just reading Michelle is comment there. I loved the book. The concept sounded weird when hearing about it at your festival, but it was funny and an odd way of presenting history. Yes, the comedy, it's full of jokes. I mean, how does Chris manage to encompass a book that's so humorous with these characters, these fossilized characters, all talking about the history of the world and their world and our world, and all sorts of funny character jokes come in and dance around and play all around it at the same time. It's a remarkable delivery, first of all, and that was one of the most potent initial impressions I had of it. As I said, I've never quite come across the delivery of a book quite like this.
Yes, I felt as though I was reading a book that was written by someone extraordinarily clever. I was, but I don't mean in a smart-ass way either. I just mean, it was so clever. The concept of it, I mean, we can all have a great idea, but to then make it work, I mean, that was the thing. He really did make, a fossil's conversation with, another fossil. It was believable that, you were transported to those places in history that he was describing. And I don't know, I believe that had happened. I was quite happy to go along with that story, but in an emotional way as well, like in terms of, the response even in the early part of Mammoth to finding out he had a son, and that, all of a sudden there was that connection with a son that he'd never anticipated having, and the way that it was very, delicately but directly dealt with sort of the Moses's character and, the racial issues of that time and that era. And I mean, all these things came up, but as you say, Michael, there was something so jocular about the delivery at the same time. Like I was never overwhelmed with the historical facts, but I was very aware that I was surrounded by them.
Yes, immersed. I felt myself very immersed in the story. Chris, of course, as we'll hear, is Irish, which is why so much of Ireland's history is in it. He, in that wonderful Irish way, there's a lot of sentimentality in all Irish writing, I think, because there's something so sad about Ireland and the Irish diaspora and Irish histories. And this story is imbued with that as well, especially the first main story of, and I think that kind of reflects the Irish diaspora. I think I'll ask Chris about this, or maybe I'm being too literal, I'm not sure, of the mammoths out of the warming, or is it the cooling? But it's a climate change event happening somewhere back in primordial times, and they link up with the wolves because they're being decimated by the changing world, and they're being decimated by the onset of mankind. And I've forgotten the what's the name for Clovis, which I think is Homo erectus. I think I remember this the school book we had to do, The Inheritors at school. If people can comment on this, who did The Inheritors, which I think is about the ascendancy of Homo sapien over Homo erectus, or Cro-Magnon man, or one of the ones that we descend from, and they were intelligent and they could hunt in packs, and it was the end of the road for species like the mammoth. So the first story is this sort of literally, I guess, out of Africa kind of movement north to where things are going to be cooler, and they link up with the wolves. It's the most beautiful story. And that's when they have the kind of tragic event, and the main character, Mammoth, actually dies and then becomes embedded in the tundra. But he's still alive, and all the characters are alive. And for those who haven't read all of it, his mate is a carnivore, a dinosaur carnivore. And they just start discussing where they come from and their role in history, and the way mankind has affected so much of history and the natural world. And they're such different characters. The dinosaur character is a real smartass. He's obviously I think he's been in a museum in Florida, and he's picked up the lingo, and he talks as a kind of a cool kind of he's a real sort of smarty pants. And they have this wonderful kind of toying, slightly competitive relationship that really, really works. That's one of the most endearing features about it.
There's a commentary there. We'll just go over the comments soon. Barbie Robinson has made asked a very good question. She'd like to know how the historical references were chosen. So that is something that we must make sure that we ask Chris that, because that's actually really interesting. But I also I like the fact that the whole premise of it, really, by using, well, you know, my take on, or what I sort of feel about it, is that it's telling that story that history is alive. Like these fossils died a few times, or, were buried a few times, and even the way they're being discussed, they talk about, that happening, and their relaunch into the new realities that they find, or realities they find themselves. Is that just reminding us that history, that it's a live thing, our learnings from it and the stories that come out of it, and the fact that it gets reframed a little bit differently every time we learn something new about it. So
that's great. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
Well, I just think because history can be so linear, and it's the story of whoever's written it.
Yeah, always, yes. That's lovely, and because I've never read such living history, but because it's from the mouth of long dead creatures that are brought back to life, that have this wonderful sage-like ability to see everything in its context. And as they weave through these historical chapters and moments, you just believe them. Suspension of disbelief. Cheryl has said to us, and it's a great point, Cheryl, I've never had to suspend belief to the extent that I had into this book, but after a couple of chapters, it seemed perfectly okay for a mammoth fossil be telling a story. I had exactly the same experience, Cheryl. It was like after page 10, it was like, what? What? Hang on. I had to keep going and say, so it's a fossil, or bits of a fossil, in a museum who's chatting to his buddy, and we're supposed to go along with that. And you think it's almost like a kid's book. It sort of opens like a young person's book, and it's not a young person's book. Young adults would love this, I'm sure, but I had to push through to go, okay, I'm kind of along for the ride here. I'm kind of in with it. And you don't expect it to go where it does. As I said, a lot of it concerns Ireland, and particularly, and I know one of the many unsuccessful attempts that the Irish had to kick the Brits out was in 1798. And unfortunately, so many, we often think that the first Irish rebellion was in 1916, the Post Office and Michael Collins, and then the Irish Civil War. They had tried to get the Brits out dozens and dozens of times, and each one of them failed more and more miserably and more bloodily often. And they talk about the 1798 rebellion, and our Mammoth was witness to it all. He was sort of dug up and carted around. He went from America, where he came from. He was brought to France. He was going back to America, but he was stolen, ended up in Ireland, and was witness to all these moments of history. And it's up to us to interpret as readers how his life interacts with these moments in history too. Sue has asked, is it intended for adults and or young adult readers? We should put that to Chris, I think.
Yeah, I haven't read anywhere that it was directly aimed at young adult readers, but after reading it, I couldn't imagine why you wouldn't give it to a young adult reader. I would hope my son will read it if I can, actually put a book in my hand.
Yeah, I know.
I think the language is something that the language felt quite modern to me, and I don't know whether that's just in terms of the stylistically the way it was written, and even when I say the way it was published, like I'm still getting used to, and I know everybody else is probably already there, but I still like having. I was losing characters, I guess, in terms of the speech pattern a little bit at the beginning. I had to get used to the rhythm of it, and I would spend a lot of time going, who was that? Who am I reading? What character? And then, of course, I wanted to work out what they looked like, because I like to have a visual of what I'm reading. And it did take me a little bit to get into that. And there was a couple of pages in, I was thinking, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know that my brain is wired this way. But after I got over that, then I didn't notice. And then I was actually so in the story, I don't think I noticed anything about anything, in terms of the way that it was constructed.
I wonder if anybody else had that. Yes, it took me a while too. I found I know that's probably maybe if Chris had written this 20, 30 years ago, we'd have the old quote marks after each and every speech. But you see, modern publishing doesn't do that. It's like movies. Movies are all sped up. Movies are really quick now, and books in a way are the same. I did find it difficult to follow who was talking, but after a while it actually didn't matter. You kind of got the gist of it. It was the penguin, the smart ass, the sort of grumpy penguin, the smart ass carnivorous dinosaur, our imperious the mammoth, and then the Egyptian queen, the Middle Kingdom mummified queen, who was very sort of haughty and didn't believe a word of any of it. But I will ask Chris about if he deliberately tried to mash that up a bit just to keep the pace of it going. But it's interesting seeing these modern techniques of telling a story, and I think that way of constructing the dialogue is just one of them. And the other, of course, is the outrageous, I think it was anthropomorphization, when you attributing human characteristics to animals, something which I've never always been comfortable with. And I think for most part it worked, because after a while it didn't bother me anymore. So ergo, Chris had a success with this, and I came to love the characters very much.
Yes, well, I think that's sort of what we were alluding to at the beginning, that it was that when you sort of had suspended, or you sort of a suspension of reality, or sort of our construct of it, you got we were very much there with the characters, even though it seemed astonishingly such a big leap. While I was reading it, though, I was actually wondering about how you would find it from that historical perspective, in terms of being someone that does write historical work, and you are a lover of history, and you're quite linear in the way that you actually know when everything happened and all the exact bits that fit in, and you like a beginning and an end. And I wondered how these overlays whether you would actually be able to sit with that, or whether that was quite discombobulating for you.
It was a bit discombobulating at first, and please, I wonder how other people found this sort of dipping in and out of historical stories. Michelle has just commented, you could almost tell who was speaking by the speech style. Yes, that's exactly correct. I also formal Mammoth and slangy paleo. Yes, and of course, I sort of got after a while. Whenever there was a kind of paragraph indentation, that was a new character. Characters very rarely spoke over two distinct paragraphs. I think Chris did that to save confusion. Yeah. Look, I did find someone who's a bit of a history, a rigidly conservative historical, stickler and nerd like me. I did find it confronting, but very liberating too. And I think that style, particularly the story of our two Irish brother and sister kind of Irish rebels, Quiva and her brother, who were involved in that said rebellion going back, their kind of terribly sad journey down the river, initially to kind of pay for to sell Mammoth's bones to pay for another chapter of the Irish rebellion. And then when that flopped, they just thought they'd raise money to support their new life in America. And that didn't work out when the brother was killed by French pelt hunters who, ironically, not ironically, I'm sure Chris built this in, people who were killing animals for gain and profit, or sort of almost wiping out the seal and the beaver populations. And he gets killed, and she becomes embedded into one of the American native communities. And it's a beautiful kind of way he kind of ends it on that. She becomes this Irish girl who becomes one of the Indian tribes and who learns to speak their language. But it's a story that I kind of found, I don't know if I can take this at face value. There must be something more to it. But then I relaxed and I got over that, and I really started to enjoy it. Cheryl and Erwin have given some nice comments. Brooke, can you see them if you'd like to read them?
Yes, I just quickly responded to Cheryl. Cheryl was saying that she found the conversations jarring at first, and to have ancient creatures speaking in such modern slang was an interesting choice. I think this would appeal more to a young audience. And I have to say that I think that's why at the beginning I did wonder whether I was reading something that was meant for a brain wired slightly differently to mine, possibly a younger brain. But once I got used to it, that left me. It was just a matter of getting, and I guess that's what happens if something is completely original. And I really do believe that this is one of the most original books. And that term is so overused, but I have never read anything like it. Like it is not like a young adult book that I've read before either. That's not why I thought it was for someone younger. I think it was more just that I found it challenging as I was getting used to it. Hi, Chris.
And we're joined by the man himself, I think. He'll be coming.
Hello.
Hello, Chris.
Hello, how are you all?
Wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us.
No problem. I thought I'd pop in early and see what's going on.
Oh, good. Do that. Well, Brooke, would you like to say something first before I jump in to interrogate Chris? After you.
Well, that's right. I was just looking back at these other comments. So Erwin was saying Evolution by Stephen Baxter is a serious novel along similar lines, but nowhere near as much fun to read. Have you read that, Chris? Evolution?
Everyone keeps suggesting these books to me, but I obviously didn't do my research as thoroughly as I thought I was, because no, I've not even heard of that book.
No. And then Sue Ward has mentioned, I wonder if David Attenborough would enjoy it, making history accessible to, she said, a younger audience, but and I would say a broader audience possibly. I mean, I think you could find yourself reading this book without realizing you had any love of history, and even with very little knowledge, but you could start reading Mammoth and then all of a sudden develop any interest in it, because the story itself is so engaging that you're there in it, like you're part of it. You're learning about things or listening to conversations that otherwise you wouldn't even be witness to. And I think that's a really...
Yeah, and that was the way I kind of approached history. I always loved history as a kid, much more so than I loved English literature. My English teacher, when I was in high school, I hated his guts. He was insufferable. One of those people who just thought he was an expert on everything. But my history teacher, whose nickname was Nuki, because he looked a little bit like Nuki Bear. I don't know if people know Nuki Bear. He was a ventriloquist dummy. I think he was called something Daltrey, and or Roger de Courcy, that was his name. And he had a little teddy bear, which was a dummy called Nuki. And my history teacher looked just like the ventriloquist dummy. And so we loved him, and he had a very relaxed and funny approach to history. He knew that a lot of the stuff on the curriculum that he was meant to be teaching us was quite dry and not that interesting to teenagers. And so he would often make jokes about it, or try to find something, a funny way to teach us about history, or even just sometimes put his feet up on the desk and say, we're not going to do anything boring about the Tudors today. We're just going to tell jokes instead. So I think maybe that kind of stuck with me, and as I've grown to love history more as I got older, I really wanted to avoid a kind of dry academic approach to it, and make it a wee bit more accessible for a general readership, and not put people off by lecturing them about history.
Well, Chris, I just want to congratulate you on such a beautifully original book. I only finished it recently, but it's like, I can honestly say I've never quite read a book like that, and it just sort of bent my brain in so many different ways. A couple of people have said, firstly, you've got to get through the barrier of the suspension of disbelief, which is not an unpleasant process, but it does take a bit of exit, because the first 10 pages, as I was saying before to our guests listening, oh, come on, what have we got? Hang on, there's a mammoth having a conversation with a smart-ass carnivore in a museum. And as their characters are being developed, they then you kind of take off into this, these peripatetic historical journeys that just range all across human and animal existence. And it's such a wild ride. And it takes you to so many fascinating parts of history. And I want to ask later how they're all linked, but some of the areas of history that you mentioned that you touched on, such as the 1798, I was just saying, one of the many unsuccessful attempts the Irish had to kick the English out, which seemed to get more bloody and more heavily repressed as the centuries went on. You delve into Nazi Germany a little bit, and of course the sort of relationship between the English and the French and the Americans around the time of the Louisiana history. Are these all your favorite chapters of history, and is this book just an excuse to bind them up into one volume?
Not really. The content of the book was kind of dictated by the Mammoth, really, in that because Jefferson was digging up or trying to unearth mammoth bones in 1800 and 1801, that really determined what part of history I was going to look at. And I had no real idea of a lot of the things that went on between 1800 and 1805. So it was such a joy to discover that there was all these interesting things that had happened in the world then, and a lot of pleasure just digging into them. The Jefferson thing, I still really can't get over the fact that he was the American election. I mean, we're facing an American election this year, and we all know it's going to be an absolute schmozzle. But it was pretty much always a schmozzle. In 1800, when they had an election, The election back then, it took quite a long time to count the votes. So it took months to count the votes. So they didn't actually know who'd won for ages. So the election it took about a month to conduct the election. And in early December 1800, the election was over, but Jefferson didn't know he'd won until February of the following year. And until February 1801. So it took about 3 months for him to discover that he'd won. But in the meantime, he was writing letters asking people to go out and find mammoth bones for him. I just thought that's incredible that he was more interested in that than being the president of his country. And his first few years in power, I mean, he's a very famous president. He did a lot, but his first few years in power were kind of soured by the fact that he was absolutely obsessed with the bones of the mammoth and had a huge collection of them at the White House. He was getting all sorts of people to send him bones, and he would spend hours in the evenings poring over these bones, much the way the current president probably watches Fox News and eats hamburgers. And he would try to assemble them himself. This idea of an American Leviathan, it absolutely fascinated him. And he was heavily criticized in his first year in office for not paying attention to policy, but concentrating on this weird animal he had in his study.
God, what a great story. One of my favorite parts of it, and it links to that, is when our hero is taken to France on display to sort of up it to the snooty French, which was news to me because I always thought the French had a kind of a grudging admiration for the new United States because they'd managed to kick the English out. It's important for us to realize now how utterly almost unacceptable the notion was, even in this era which fancied itself as being, in the golden light of the age of enlightenment, how unacceptable it was to even acknowledge that the world was billions or millions of years old. It was just simply, or it was almost taboo to suggest that the current thinking based on the Bible was wrong. So, and you portray beautifully that. And we see it now when scientific evidence is coming up against people's beliefs and people are intransigent and refuse to believe it. But yes, that's what the mammoth was, wasn't it?
Still very much. Go ahead, Brooke.
Also, just the people that were doing the science then in that era, though, they were often people of faith themselves, though, weren't they? As opposed to it being two opposing groups. They were one and the same.
Right. And I find it utterly fascinating that men of science were men of faith as well, and they tried desperately to balance their beliefs in their faith with the evidence that was being presented to them. And it sort of speaks very strongly to us today too, I think, as you say, Michael, where even today you can be presented with pretty hard evidence and people just don't want to believe it. And we've seen that a lot with climate change and even with COVID, where people are skeptical about what they're hearing and don't want to believe it because it's contrary to some deep held belief in some other system or something they've read on the internet or some sort of conspiracy theory or some sort of religious belief. And but back in the early 1800s, at least a lot of the scientists then were willing to reassess their beliefs in light of evidence that was being presented to them. They weren't completely intransigent. And I guess it must have been pretty compelling, the evidence. That's the thing. If you're digging up bones of some huge creature and you're able to at least date them to a certain degree, and you realize, wait a minute, these are tens of thousands of years old, some of them a lot older than that. That's a complete contradiction to what it says in the Bible that I've been brought up to believe. But they were willing to set aside those beliefs, or at least say, well, maybe it's not all what we thought it was. And I kind of like the idea of being a person of education and even great spiritual beliefs who's willing to adapt or change according to circumstance. I don't think we're very good at it as humans. And we certainly haven't learned many lessons since then. In fact, we arguably are even worse at it now than we used to be.
And the period of this part of the book is half a century before Darwin's theory started to get traction.
And that's not that long ago, right? I mean, that's only just over 200 years ago. So in the last 200 years, scientific thought and our belief about the world that we live in has changed radically and is still changing and probably will change again in the future. And I think it's worth bearing in mind that, that a lot of our ideas about the world around us are fairly recent.
Does that mean that we are quite adaptable and we do change our belief systems still in the modern world? It's just that when you're in it, it feels as though there's a lot of resistance, and especially now because it's so loud. You know, there's so many viewpoints all the time.
That's true. And I mean, the invention of our friend, the internet that we're using tonight to speak, has been the biggest double-edged sword in human history, really. It connects us, it provides us with the sum of all human knowledge at our fingertips, but also we can't really trust it anymore. So that presents us with a real issue going forward. I do believe, though, Brooke, that you're right. We have the capacity to change and to adapt. And I have to believe that about people. I have to believe that we're not just going to sit on our hands and do nothing. And maybe something like the current coronavirus crisis is a little bit of a kick up the arse for us all to remind us that we need to be proactive citizens in accepting the views of experts and changing our means of critical thinking.
Yeah, I mean, because I do think that we can change, and people do, and agile, but that doesn't mean we always make the correct choice. Change isn't always done in the right direction.
No, and we have got a very bad track record of making terrible mistakes again and again and again, which is one of the ongoing themes in the book, the idea that we made mistakes 10,000 years ago when we exterminated these animals, and that changed the world. And we still continue to make the same mistakes and don't really learn very well from the mistakes we make. But we have that capacity. And also with regards to something like cloning, which is talked about, in the book and is one of the themes, I find it amazing to think of scientists all around the world, extremely intelligent, clever people, forging ahead with something like cloning because they can, not necessarily because they should. And I think that's one of the failings of the scientific community, perhaps, is that the ability to do something overrides their ethics or morality sometimes. And we will for sure in our lifetime see extinct animals coming back and walking the earth.
Well, this is how you end. And I personally, because, the notion of any animal being brought to extinction, particularly by the hand of man, unutterably ghastly and painful. I really love that. I love that little epilogue that you have. And I mean, it's a complete flight of fancy, isn't it, Chris? We should explain for people who aren't there. It's a kind of imagined world where our mammoth is back amongst his own kind. And was it this area that's been put aside in Siberia for... Is this true?
Yes, it is true. And it's called Pleistocene Park. And it's a huge area of Siberia that has been set aside and rewilded, essentially returned to the same conditions it was 10,000 years ago. And there's already a bunch of creatures living there, but they're creatures that aren't extinct. And Dr. Sergei Zimov and his sons are the scientists who are running that. And they're preparing it for mammoth. That's their goal. So if they do manage to clone mammoth in the lab sometime in the next few years, they'll have a place to go where they can have the exact natural environment that they had 10,000 years ago.
And where Vladimir Putin can get some great shots bare-chested riding a mammoth.
I'm sure he will. Yes.
That's extraordinary. And you say that, so I'll let you talk in a second, that the Asian elephant is only 0.04% different from the mammoth. How is that?
The mammoth is just basically an ancient elephant, but it was adapted for a cold climate. So that 0.04% is important to get right, but that will give them the furry coat, and that changes the length of their tusks, essentially makes them more adaptable to the cold. The Harvard woolly mammoth revival team, run by Dr. George Church, they are not going to clone the mammoth back to life. That's going to happen in South Korea and in Shenzhen, China. They're currently doing it. But in Harvard, they're doing something slightly different. They're creating a fake mammoth. They're basically taking the elephant DNA and they're just tweaking it so that the elephant a current live elephant, they can take the DNA from that, tweak it so that it has a furry coat and longer tusks, and then have that raised by elephants. And so they're creating a false mammoth. They're not bringing an old dead creature back to life, which has its own totally unexplored areas of consideration. It occurred to me the other day that because they have actual mammoth DNA, in 2006, a complete carcass of a mammoth thawed out of the permafrost. There's loads, they're thawing out all the time, but the one in 2006, it had raw, rotten flesh and blood. And in fact, one of the scientists who was on site, who dug it out, one of the first things he did was he cut out some of the flesh with his knife and he ate it, because he wanted to be the first person, like raw. So he wanted to be the first person in 10,000 years to say he'd eaten mammoth. So he just ate some of the raw flesh. But because they have that, which was a huge risk, right? He could, God knows what parasites and everything it had. But because they have actual mammoth DNA, they're going to bring, it's a hard thing to get your head around, but they're going to bring back creatures that already lived. So it's a clone. So it's a copy of a creature that's already been alive. So say, for example, we got some of your DNA, Michael, and then years from now you passed away and we decided to bring you back.
Yeah.
Now you'd obviously be a baby, and but you're the same exact genetic person as was here before. Now, once you start to grow up and become an adult, will you have memories of the time when you were here last? Will you, in your dreams, will you have images from your previous life? It's completely unexplored. We just don't know. And that's essentially what we're doing. We're bringing back the actual animals that we killed.
Because even in that, when people, I mean, I know it's not exactly the same by any stretch, but when people get new, hearts and lungs, and they say that there are people that say that they have memories, or all of a sudden it changes for them in terms of they have memories that belong to the other person because their organs are in their body and somehow they hold memory. I mean, I don't know how much scientific proof there has on that, but I've read quite a few stories of people saying that has been one of, some of the after effects of having, other people's organs put in you. Oh.
Yeah, that's a bit of a worry, isn't it? That idea of genetic memory. But I love what you're saying, because that kind of backs up my harebrained split consciousness theory that I talk about in the book. This idea that you can have the bones of a creature back above ground, and somehow they're conscious. There's some form of consciousness that is linked to those bones, even if they're split up. So if the tooth of a mammoth is in someone's pouch when they're on the Lewis and Clark journey, then he's aware of what's going on there. But I mean, that sounds crazy, but there are a lot of religions currently in the world who do believe that there is an awareness or a spirituality or a form of consciousness linked to human remains, and that when they're above ground, they are somehow back here again with us, and that's why they should be left in the ground to sleep. And certainly there's been lots of controversy over the past century with, for example, indigenous remains in Australia being poached by the British Museum and put on display there, and the actual horror of that. If you can imagine someone digging up your grandmother and taking her bones back to some museum in another country to put on display for financial gain, it's a crazy thought. Obviously you'd want her back. and you'd want her back in the ground. So that kind of notion of remains still having a consciousness comes through very strongly in the book, I think.
Let's some of our contributors. Let's give them a. Sue's been contributing. Books like yours, Chris, allow for depth of thinking, critical thought. We need more readers generally. I couldn't agree more with that. But also, what was the primary aim of your book? Sue's asking. Thanks, Sue.
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. I'm not quite sure what the answer to that is.
It doesn't have to be an answer.
No, I mean, the book covers a lot of territory, and I guess maybe one of the things I wanted to do was, it's linked to the incorporation of humor and levity throughout the book. I obviously read a lot of quite dry tomes when I was researching this, and it got to the point where I was sort of thinking a lot about extinction and appropriation and climate change and, you know, very sort of current contemporary topics. And they just always seem to be portrayed in such a boring way, and so much so that it often just puts you off. And I started to think, oh, wouldn't it be nice to maybe approach these topics in a way that was a little bit more accessible and a little bit more lighthearted, perhaps, although, you know, people will probably say I shouldn't be making light of climate change and extinction, but just talking about these things in slightly different terms, just to make them that little bit more accessible, and to stop people from tuning out, because we can't really afford that. We can't really afford people to say, I'm sick of hearing about climate change. That's a disaster if that happens. So maybe that was one of the primary aims, just to present themes that are often presented to us in a very dry and academic fashion in a slightly more accessible manner.
And there's nothing self-righteous about your tone. And I think a lot of those topics often can lean into the self-righteous, you know, at times, and be telling us things as opposed to engaging us in a conversation. And I was saying it earlier that I really felt that I had a lovely takeaway from Mammoth, that it was reminding me that history is a live thing, and that history is, you know, because whoever wrote it has that story. And so there's always changes. We always learn something new. And so history itself is alive. And I really felt that when I was reading your stories, like you gave it a life that, yeah, it was believable and also transcended the dateline. Like, you know, the issues that you were talking about were still in the now.
And history is often written through a real prism as well, where we take it for granted whenever something, when we're taught history, but we don't. How do we really know whether it was the actual truth of the matter unless you were there, unless you got a time machine? I do wonder if we ever invent time travel, whether we'll end up having to completely rewrite history, because we'll have access to information that we never had before. And years ago, when I was younger, I had this crazy notion for a book, which anyone listening wants to try and write this book, you're more than welcome. The idea was called The 99ers. And I wanted to compare the lives of ordinary people in 1999, 1899, and 1799. Not rich people, not aristocrats, not politicians, not anyone whose life is recorded, but just ordinary people. I was curious to know if people at the end of each millennium felt the same way, whether they felt that anxiety about the turn of the century, whether they had similar sort of fears. And of course, 1999 is pretty easy to find out what people thought. 1899, a bit harder, and 1799, impossible. Because the lives of ordinary people are just not really recorded. And
no, probably for it anyway. You know, the ordinary people in 1799 would have been living pretty desperate lives.
Yeah, and so we just don't know how they felt. And so that, you know, I've always been fascinated with that idea of like, history is written by often very patriarchal winners, you know, the conquerors, the colonialists, the people who come in and take everything and leave a wake of destruction behind them. And it's a very one-sided way of looking at history. And I would love to I mean, people often say when you're young, oh, what would you do if you had a time machine? Where would you go? I mean, I've got a long list of places I'd like to go, but probably not quite for the reasons a lot of people would want to go there.
I just want to comment on the style, a couple of aspects of the style of Mammoth, Chris. And Brooke mentioned before that sort of any sense of pomposity or self-righteousness in the main character is so beautifully undercut by the kind of foil character of the dinosaur. And that's often, I think that's our interpretation too, when he's sort of getting a bit carried away with himself. And perhaps it's you as the author saying, look, I know this is a bit of a silly construct, so let's just sort of like keep a lid on it a little bit and have this character of the Tyrannosaurus. He's not a Tyrannosaurus Rex. He's an Allosaurus or something. Is he? He's a
Tarbosaurus and
saying
Tyrannosaurus Batar, which is
yeah. He's sort of
just
a
Mongolian cousin. Yeah,
Mongolian cousin. Yes, he was dug up from the Gobi Desert, wasn't he? But he undercuts the Mammoth constantly, which is quite delightful. And that
was done very much on purpose as well, though, because that's kind of related to this idea of, as you mentioned, Brooke, about being lectured about history. It just turns you right off, and I hate it. And I hate it whenever anyone tries to lecture me about any topic. You know, it just automatically makes me want to do the opposite to what they're telling me I should do. I mean, I used to be called Johnny Opposite whenever I was growing up, so that Tyrannosaurus, it was vital that the other fossils like the Tyrannosaur would interject and bring him down to size a little bit and question him and say, wait a minute, you know, this is getting boring. Can you shut up or get on with tell us some more exciting stuff? Or wait a minute, how did you know this? You weren't even there. Constantly questioning the idea of the overarching narrator as being the expert that you don't question. And we have so many books where the narrator's voice is never questioned. And so I just thought it'd be nice to have a little bit of a go at that.
That was great. And he also demanded to be listened to himself a couple of times. It was like, actually, I'm listening to you. You can listen to me for a bit. And that was, good. Helen?
There's someone there's got a question that's about, I haven't been asked this yet, and I've been wondering if people have been asking about this. Helen, I can see the questions too in the chat. Helen Shields' question.
Yes.
Read it out.
It's, are you aware of ways the book has impacted to affirm or challenge readers' ideas of connection across species, culture, gender, or location? Who is superior or inferior?
That's a good question.
Yes, it is a good question. I mean, there's a whole section in the book where Moses Williams, who is the African-American who works in Peale's Museum in Philadelphia, and is well-educated gentleman who's brought up in the same education system as his pseudo-brother, Rembrandt Peale. And they go off to France together to tour the mammoth bones. And he is immediately questioned as to whether he actually is an intelligent man in France. The French treat him much like they do the bones, as a curiosity. They think that he could not possibly hold the opinions that he claims because he is, as they say, an Ethiopian. Because at that time in history, fascinatingly, as well as while people like Georges Cuvier were promoting the idea of an age of reptiles that predated the age of man, and this was the first idea of dinosaurs ruling the earth long before we were here, which, you know, messed with people's heads. And he was correct about that, but he also was a big proponent of the idea of scientific racism, which was that mankind was split into three different species. There was, or three different groups. There was the Ethiopian, the Mongolian, and the Caucasian, with the Caucasian, of course, being the superior one. And that a Ethiopian, such as Moses, and Moses questions and says, why do you keep calling me an Ethiopian? I'm from Philadelphia. He questions it, but no matter what, he quickly realizes no matter what he does to prove his intelligence, they just won't believe it. Because at that time, they believed that if you took someone from Africa and you put them in Norway, that eventually their skin would just turn white through time. These ridiculous notions of superiority and inferiority, unfortunately, became very embedded in even scientific thought at that time, and have endured ever since. And there's probably still people around today who would hold those beliefs. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit as well in the book. Just the fact that science isn't always correct.
I just want to comment on, I loved the various and intertwining journeys and the sense of various journeys in the book, Chris, and I just sort of, I can't help linking them. So many of the journeys in the book are to do with water, like the first journey out of the mammoths moving into, is it a hotter or a colder climate? I can't, I apologize. I missed where initially the mammoths are moving. They're moving north into.
They're moving north. They're moving north to a colder climate. Yeah.
A colder climate, and they get wiped out by a glacier. Then, and I kept thinking, oh, that's the Irish diaspora as well across the sea of the Atlantic, and then you have Quiver, one of the Irish rebel girl, and her brother journeying down a river. Is this all linked, or am I drawing this? Am I drawing some long bows here?
You probably have stumbled upon something there. I hadn't really thought about that, but I guess I do like the idea of river journeys and sea journeys, and water as a sort of ongoing conduit for the movement of people and the migration of people. And of course, the mammoth is a nice little metaphor for the migration of the mass migration of people today because of the climate. You know, they're essentially climate refugees. They're moving further north because their climate is changing because of people. And
any evidence that in this story they kind of team up with the wolves? Is that your fantasy?
That was just a fantasy of mine, I think. You know,
there may be something. The great comment for Sue said earlier. I wonder if David Attenborough would like this book, and for a man who recently quoted that he can't think of many problems the world's facing that wouldn't be solved without less human beings in them, in it, I think he probably would approve of this book very much.
I'd love to meet David Attenborough. Who wouldn't want to meet David Attenborough? You know, exactly. It'll be the saddest day in human history whenever David Attenborough passes on.
Yeah.
You need to get him to read a section of your book. Actually have a recording of him. He's got one of the best voices in the world, as well as, you know.
He does have a great voice. He'd be very good at playing the mammoth. I mean, in the audiobook, I don't know if anyone's had a chance to listen to the audiobook, but it's pretty incredible, really, because there's an actor called Rupert Degas, and he does all the voices. And I don't read the book at all because they all sound pretty stupid in my voice. But even my authors afterward, he did me. He can do any accent in the world, and he plays the mammoth as Orson Welles. It's uncanny. Really? And yes, and the Hatshepsut, the Egyptian pharaoh, I nearly, the top of my head nearly lifted off when I heard it, because he does a note perfect Dame Maggie Smith.
Now I would go and listen to the audiobook. So
it's a completely different experience. It's an actor's interpretation. It's very performative, and it wasn't until I was listening to it and laughing, and occasionally I think, wait a minute, I actually wrote this, I think.
That's great.
But I love the idea of someone else interpreting the story and performing it. That's quite satisfying to me. I didn't want to be one of those boring authors who insisted on reading it himself and do all the voice. There's no way I'm going to tackle all those voices.
Do you encourage young people to read this, Chris? Because it just seems a fabulous kind of one of those. I mean, I'm loath to put it into any category because I adored it, but it was like for young readers interested in history and animals and extinction, the history of the world. It's a fabulous kind of one of those wonderful bridging reading experiences between old and young readers.
Well, I've been hearing from a lot of journalists who've interviewed me that their teenagers have been reading it. And some people have told me they've just been leaving it discreetly on the table next to their teenage son or whatever, just to see if they would read it. And it, completely unexpectedly to me, a lot of teenagers seem to be enjoying it. I heard of one journalist told me her teenage son came rushing out of his room, sat down at a keyboard because he's a bit of a musician, and started composing a piece of music. And she said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I've got to write this piece of music. I've just read the glacier scene, and I just want to compose a piece of music but to accompany that." And that was just a stunning moment for me, because the idea of me writing something that would inspire a creative response from someone else, especially someone so young, was I hadn't even really considered that. So I'm hearing that a lot of younger people are reading it, and parents are reading it to quite young children, but censoring anything that's a little bit too much for them. I mean, I do like the idea of, maybe if it does extremely well, I might rewrite it for younger readers, add some more illustrations, and I think it could be a nice, accessible way for them to enjoy a bit of history and adventure.
And all the climate change topics as well. There's been some huge studies done over the last few years, and Gen Z and the young people, basically people a lot younger than any of us, that people don't have written them off because of their social media habits and things. It's that they're not politically activated, and they don't know what to do about climate change. And a lot of these people, when they had their surveys go through, is that they were saying that they are so depressed by the state of the global consciousness and the global crisis that they see at every corner, on every level, that they can't engage with it because it is completely overwhelming. But you've written a book that isn't overwhelming, but it's still poignant, and it still has facts in there, and it still has entrance points to conversations that you've broken it down enough that you haven't stopped it being real, but you've given an access point. And I think that is probably what I think a younger audience would almost find relief in. Like,
optimism, and a sense of optimism.
Yes, that's right. Because it finishes a way. So it's worth
I wanted to sort of strike that note, particularly as the book went on, because, young people today, and when I mean young people, I mean anyone sort of under 20, our generation, I'm 48, and our generation and the generations above me, we're handing them a right old mess to clean up. And they're going to be the janitors of humanity. They are going to have to work out ways of fixing everything that we have broken. And that's obviously super depressing for them, and it will change their lives, because a lot of people who might have otherwise gone in different directions are going to have to focus on problem solving and fixing things that we've messed up. And there's the story of humanity right there, going all the way back 10,000 years ago. We broke something and we're still trying to fix it now. But I think they are really, they're really the most priceless generation that's ever existed, young people today, the Gen Z and millennials, because they have a lot of responsibility on their shoulders, whether they like it or not. Yeah. And we're all going to be sitting back in old age, hoping that they save the world. Yeah. But I did want to strike that note to say that there are a lot of very intelligent people out there working on left field solutions to humanity's problems, and all is not lost. Intelligence, creativity, empathy, these are values that are very strong, I feel, in young people, and those are winning qualities. I have to believe that they will defeat the forces of stupidity and greed.
Even without an arts degree.
even if the arts degree is quite expensive.
Let's get us started. Sue has chipped in on that. I work with teenage boys. They would love it. So hard to find books that grab teenage boys. Great. Thanks for that, Sue.
7:30. It's time to wrap up. We've actually just gone a bit over time. Thank you.
Oh, no.
I know. Thank you so much for joining us, Chris. That was, your conversation is fantastic, and the book it's a modern masterpiece. And I think even as Helen has said, that the engagement that we were just discussing is an exciting impact. I think it's an exciting impact, but it's such an important impact. I think books that can engage people around these topics in the way that you've managed to deliver them is, these are the things that will save us. These are the things that will spark the hope that is required to save,
Well, it's the dream, isn't it, for any creative? If you can change the mind of one young person, and in doing so, they go on to change everyone else's mind about something, then, that's all you really want. Often people ask authors, who are you writing your book for? I mean, it's a difficult question to answer, but I often think I'm writing it for that one kid who I was, and I'm writing it for them and hoping that it finds them, whoever they are out there, the kid who's going to be president one day and change everything, the kid who's going to make some scientific breakthrough and change all our lives and literally save the world. That's what you try to do, I think, as what I tried to do anyway as a creative. I just think about that one kid that I was in the library, learning about history just on my own and not really feeling like anyone else in the world could understand how my mind worked. So I gotta hope that there's billions of kids like that out there, and that they will save us.
And you've demonstrated that you need a sense of humor to do that. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Right. Yeah. Well, let us not. I'm sure we won't be the last to congratulate you on a really beautiful and original and such a thought-provoking book, Mammoth, by Chris Flynn. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks.
And already in its second print run.
Good start.
Third print run. It's had its second reprint, so that's good.
Yeah, it's great. All right, so I'll just let people know that next month we're doing Angela Savage's Mother of Pearl,
I've just read that.
Oh, have you?
Yes, I just read it. That's also a great book for discussion about ideas of conception and the ethics and morality around different ways of giving birth. It's that's a very interesting jump off point for a big discussion, that book.
Yes, that's what we thought. So Angela she'll be joining us for that one as well. So that's next month. I'll send everyone a link so you can join us. Thanks, Chris. And thank you everyone.
Thanks, Brooke. And thanks, Brooke. Thanks, Michael. Thanks everyone for coming along and for showing an interest in my funny little book.
Had some beautiful comments just coming at the end there. Thank you for the session. Sue, Cheryl, Michelle, Helen, thank you so much for your comments. Most appreciated. And thank you, of course.
And we have recorded the session and we will have it on our YouTube channel a bit later. So I'll share the link.
Oh, brilliant.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a great
night, everyone.
Bye, everyone.